now that we are older, our adult self can be the parent that the child self never had.
Welcome to Annii Gets Healthy. I'm Annii K, and you're listening to my hour of positivity where I talk health and wellness. This show is primarily inspired by, as I've said before, a fork in the road of my life 2 years ago, where I left behind a life of negativity and unhealthy lifestyle and completely transformed everything in my life. I went from eating terribly and doing all sorts of unhealthy things to really focusing on fueling my body for success and challenging my negative mindset. So the reason that I am doing this show is so that I can perhaps inspire anybody listening to make any sort of change in their life, or to reflect on changes that you may or may not have made in your life. Another great thing about this show is that I get to talk to some fabulous guests, and this week will, of course, be one of those weeks, although I do enjoy my solo episodes. It's very lovely, the time that we share, just the two of us. But this week, we are going to talk about self-forgiveness, because as much as I do like to talk about physical health, there really is so much that we do within our own minds that does affect our physical health and, of course, our mental health. So I think that self-forgiveness is something that's very important, and it relates to a lot of things that happened in my struggle and my transition of life, going from, whether you look at it from a weight perspective or from a mental health and recovery perspective. There really are a lot of aspects of this that we can delve into, and we certainly will. However, I am going to begin the show, first of all, by saying that all of you guys have really great ideas, and you have your own unique experiences and preferences, and I love hearing about them. So I do urge you to reach out to me, whether you agree with me or disagree with me. I'm most active on Instagram. You can find me there at Annii Gets Healthy. That's ANNII Gets Healthy. It's my username on Facebook as well. I also am on Twitter, but I'm not very active. But you can find me there at Annii K Health or AnnieGetsHealthy@gmail.com for any inquiries you may have. I've been considering doing a few YouTube videos here and there. If there's any interest in that, we'll see how that goes. But as of now, that is where you can find me. As I say every episode, I do like to provide this disclaimer that I am not a physician. I am no health professional as of now. I have interests and I have intentions, but as of now, I have no clinical relationship with a lot of the topics that I discuss. They come from my personal experience and the experience of my guests and any research that they may have partaken in. I will also occasionally reference books, articles, and journals, but if you're gonna incorporate anything from this show into your life, I encourage you to do your own research, do your own homework, and have a balanced perspective. Look at things that agree, look at things that disagree. It's always good for your information to be falsifiable. If you are going to make any sort of modification in your life, whether it be based on the content of this show or not, I urge you to speak with a physician or a personal trainer if you want a really well-rounded approach. As I've said before, any change taken on too drastically can be detrimental to your health, and that's not good. I don't want you guys to hurt yourselves. So please reach out, do your research, talk to medical health professionals, dietitians, personal trainers, whatever it may be. Make sure that you're going into whatever you're doing informed. And of course, with a positive frame of mind, which is a great way to lead into this week's episode on self-forgiveness. I am, in a moment, going to take our first break of the hour just to get it out of the way, because I don't like I don't like ending important conversations to take a break. It feels wrong. But when we get back, I'm going to introduce my friend Josy Arsenault, who teaches yoga at Nova Studios, and we will, at some point, probably in the future, discuss the benefits of yoga. But as I've said a few times now, today we're going to talk about self-forgiveness, as we've both come a long way in our lives, and we've been friends now for almost a year, and we never really fail to talk about these sorts of things. So this is going to be a very loose and free-flowing episode of the show, and I'm quite looking forward to it, so you're not going to want to miss it. Please stay tuned. Annii Gets Healthy will be back right after these messages. Welcome back to Annii Gets Healthy. As I said before the break, Today, we're going to be talking to Josy Arsenault, a good friend of mine. Hi, Josy.
Hello.
It's a real pleasure to have you on here. I'll give the backstory of our meeting. So when I first met Josy, we were doing a math course together, and I also had an evening class in psychology, and quickly realized that I was in that class with her as well, which is usually you don't notice people in a big lecture theater, but clearly meant to be friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember the first time that you and I worked on an assignment together, and your very casual mention of veganism, which at the time I really didn't have any thoughts of going down that road. And you were never pushy about it. You just offered, your experience, and I found that really lovely. And of course, this episode isn't going to talk about veganism. I always find a way to a conversation to flow in all my past episodes about plant-based lifestyle. But and if it happens, I will forgive myself for it. See what I'm doing there? But no, so as I said, we're going to focus on self-forgiveness because both of us have definitely come from various places in our lives, and we can take a lot of that negativity with us when we move on to other things, and it can really tie us down.
Yeah.
So let's learn a bit about Josy.
So I'm from Toronto, born and raised downtown Toronto, and I never really had an interest for yoga necessarily. I kind of just grew up, regular kid, and then I guess different things happened in my life that would be considered somewhat traumatic, not necessarily as bad as some people's lives, but parents went through a divorce, and then eventually a family business that we had, that fell apart, and then my dad got diagnosed with cancer, so then he died when I was just barely 18, the day before my 18th birthday. He passed away, and then at that point I was living in Montreal, and I didn't really have many friends to connect with. I felt very off. I didn't really know what I was doing with my life. I didn't feel like I really had much to live for necessarily. I was just kind of in this limbo land, and I think that's a common thing for people between the ages of 18 and 21. It's a moment of self-discovery, and then after about 3 years I kept getting into kind of toxic relationships, isolating myself a lot. And then one day, everything kind of exploded in my life, and then I decided that I had to go back to Toronto, start from square one, and then I was like, okay, what can I do to get myself back on the right track, because I have no idea what I'm doing. So I just started doing yoga online, on YouTube, with Yoga with Adrienne, so you can look her up. She's great on YouTube, and she has a lot of 30-day challenges. So I just started. I was like, okay, I'm just going to do this. So day 1, day 2, day 3. And so every morning I would just get up, put on a video, and that's how sort of my routine started happening there. And then I was also looking through programs online, maybe considering going back to school. And then I stumbled upon this program called classical yoga teacher training. But in my mind, I was like, I could never do that. I didn't feel confident talking in front of people. I still don't really feel confident talking in front of people, but I just do it. Kind of I'm here right now. I'm just doing it because we learn by doing. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and then I just decided, screw it. I'm just going to do it. So I signed up for yoga teacher training. I did that, and then when that was done, I wanted more. So I went to more yoga teacher training in India. So I also spontaneously like to travel places and do crazy things. So I ended up in India for another month-long intensive yoga teacher training, and I learned a lot of yoga philosophy, and there's a lot of ways to forgive ourselves through yoga. I guess that's kind of where I'm at, and now I'm here in Newfoundland. I've been here for about a year now, just over a year, and I decided to study psychology, so I'm on my way there now.
So speaking of psychology, when we were taking psych together, I remember we both had, even though we didn't talk about it much within the course, we both expressed a mutual interest in positive psychology during that. And for anybody unfamiliar, positive psychology is a school of psychology that focuses not on illness and not on the things that make us unhappy, but the things that make life worth living. And I know that yoga has definitely been that for you.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I have my strength training and my running, and those are all things that are very positive in my life. But beyond that, a lot of it really does happen up top. A lot of it really does happen in the mind. And a lot of that comes from challenging a lot of these negative mindsets that we can really fall into really easily, especially here in Newfoundland, where we are pretty isolated. And you know, in terms of a general population, we don't tend to challenge ourselves very often on the negativity that floats around, because we often kind of say, well, you know, this is just the way it is and there's nothing that we can do. But what I've learned is that there's just so much room to just be mindful of where you're going with your thought processes. And, you know, if we're to look back to where I was when I was 21, the frame of mind that I was often in was nothing can get better than where I am right now. So I just have to learn to tolerate things and not change anything in my life, because that will make things worse. And of course, if you look back at your relationship with yoga, if you were to just remain static for your life and stay in Montreal and be in that period of confusion, I mean, yoga probably would not have entered your life and touched you as profoundly as it did.
Mm-mm. Yeah, and I feel like like when we stay in these places that are like comfortable, like with my tendency to isolate myself, especially when I was in Montreal, it was comfortable to isolate myself because I could lean into my like coping mechanisms. But when I am able to let go of things, that's when I create space for bigger and better things to come into my life. And it's important to stay open to those opportunities. Like in my suffering, if I can sit with those feelings, I know that eventually like something good will happen.
So do you find that when you started doing yoga, and of course engaging in a lot of just mindfulness, challenging yourself to just really evaluate things with an even footing and just like a very kind of reasonable frame of mind instead of overly emotional, did you find that you were able to really put things from your past into perspective and challenge a lot of the negativity that floated around those things?
Yeah, like I felt like I could use my past as a tool to learn about where I am right now. I've used the traumas in my past as a tool for learning more about where I am at right now, and I can use the experiences that I've had in the past as a way to inspire others to move through those kinds of similar situations.
So I know that before you came to Newfoundland, you were studying music for a while, and I know that you play piano now, and I do want to revisit that in a moment, but was that prior to the yoga that you were studying?
Oh yeah, but I find that there's a lot of like connection to the both of them.
Did you find yourself kind of in a similar state of flow playing the piano?
It was different because I grew up in the classical piano world. And I feel like I was never given the mindfulness tools, even learning how to play piano, which made me really hard on myself. So I always grew up with this thought that I wasn't as good as other people around me. I always felt inferior to other people around me.
And that can take a lot of the joy out of that, pretty much all the joy, because you want to be in that state where like every note is just something that you can enjoy and lose yourself in. And that, I can imagine, that's very challenging when you have that anxiety and that comparison. Yeah. And I can't think of anything that better relates to self-forgiveness than our tendency to compare ourselves to others. And we are so harsh on ourselves. I'm going to relate this to an experience that I had when I was a couple months into losing weight. I had set a goal for myself, and I had a few reasons for it. I began in November of 2016, and by that coming August, I had really wanted to be under 200 pounds. And I remember one day having this thought of, like, even when I reach my goal, I'm still going to be fat. And I thought back at my life, and I thought about just the years of just gaining weight again and again. And I got really mad at myself, and I thought, how could you do this to yourself? How could you let this happen? And to be honest with you, it was an anger that I held inside for a long time. Now, my way of dealing with that was certainly different than ways that I had handled